Jake Morrison floated through the dark corridor of the abandoned mining station, his flashlight cutting through the shadows like a knife. The place was quiet, too quiet. His boots mag-locked to the metal floor with each step, making soft clicking sounds that echoed in the empty halls. He checked his oxygen gauge. 4 hours left. Plenty of time to grab what he needed and get out. The distress beacon had brought him here 3 days ago. Jake lived alone on his small ship, the Wanderer, and he made his living salvaging equipment from abandoned stations like this one. People called him the best mechanic in 3 sectors. He could fix anything, human or alien technology. It didn't matter. But Jake didn't care much about his reputation anymore. He just wanted to be left alone. The mining station orbited a dead moon, far from any trade routes. The Kravesh had built it years ago to extract rare minerals. Now it was just floating junk. Jake's scanners showed valuable equipment in the cargo bay, so here he was. He pushed through a doorway into a wider corridor. His light revealed claw marks on the walls, deep ones. Jake stopped walking and pulled out his plasma pistol. Something had been here. Something big. The air felt wrong, heavy, like static before a lightning storm. Jake kept moving toward the cargo bay. He'd been in the Colonial Defense Force once, years ago. He knew how to handle danger, but he'd left that life behind after his entire squad got killed by slavers. 23 good people dead because he'd made one wrong call. He'd quit the military the next day and never looked back. Now he just fixed things and stayed away from people. It was easier that way. The cargo bay doors were massive, at least 30 feet tall. Strange. Most mining stations didn't need doors that big. Jake found the control panel and started working on it. The power was dead, but he could manually override the locks. 10 minutes later, the doors groaned open. Jake stepped inside and his breath caught in his throat. 2 enormous creatures lay on the floor of the cargo bay, trapped inside glowing blue energy fields. They looked like dragons from old Earth legends. Massive bodies covered in scales, long tails, wings folded against their sides. But these were real. One had silver-blue scales that shimmered in his flashlight. The other had crimson-gold scales that seemed to glow from within. Both creatures were barely moving. Their eyes were half closed and their breathing was slow and labored. Jake stood frozen for a moment. He'd heard stories about the Drakari, the ancient dragon species. Everyone said they went extinct 300 years ago during the first contact wars with humanity. But here were 2 of them very much alive, and someone had trapped them here. Jake walked closer, keeping his pistol ready. The silver-blue dragon's eye opened slightly, focusing on him. He felt something brush against his mind. Not words exactly, but feelings. Pain, exhaustion, fear. He lowered his pistol. The containment fields hummed with energy, creating a blue glow around each dragon. Jake recognized the technology. It was modified human military equipment, the kind used to hold dangerous prisoners. But these fields were doing more than just holding the dragons. They were draining them. Jake moved to a nearby console and activated it. The screen flickered to life, showing station logs. He scrolled through them quickly. The Kravesh had captured these 2 dragons 3 months ago. They'd been draining their bioelectric energy and selling it on the black market. Dragon energy was worth a fortune. It could power cities for years. But a solar flare had hit the station 2 weeks ago, damaging the main systems. The Kravesh had evacuated, planning to come back later for their prize. Jake looked at the dragons again. The silver-blue one was watching him. There was intelligence in those eyes. Understanding he should leave. This wasn't his problem. He'd come here for salvage, not to play hero. The smart move was to grab what he could and go. Jake turned toward the exit, but he stopped after 3 steps. He stood there in the dark cargo bay, listening to the slow breathing of the dying dragons behind him. His hand tightened on his pistol. He remembered his squad, remembered watching them die while he did nothing. He'd been pinned down, unable to help. He'd survived and they hadn't. He'd promised himself he'd never be that helpless again, never freeze up when people needed him. But these weren't people. They were aliens. Ancient, dangerous aliens that had gone to war with humanity. They probably hated humans. The silver-blue dragon made a soft sound like a whimper. Jake cursed under his breath and walked back to the console. He spent the next hour studying the containment system. The setup was clever and cruel. The fields weren't just holding the dragons. They were slowly disrupting their neural pathways, scrambling their brains while draining their energy. In another 2 days, the dragons would suffer permanent brain damage. They'd be alive but mindless. Jake pulled up the field schematics. The system had multiple failsafes. If he tried to shut it down the wrong way, it would send a massive energy pulse through both dragons. That would kill them instantly. He needed time to figure this out. Time he might not have. Jake set up his portable equipment and started working. He was good with his hands, always had been. His father had been a mechanic too back on Earth. He'd taught Jake that every machine could be understood if you were patient enough. The containment fields used a rotating energy frequency. Jake would need to match that frequency perfectly to safely power them down, but the frequency kept changing based on the dragon's biosigns. It was like trying to hit a moving target in the dark. He worked for 3 hours straight, barely noticing when his oxygen alarm beeped. 1 hour left. He'd need to go back to his ship soon. Jake stood up and stretched his back. The crimson gold dragon hadn't moved at all. Its breathing was getting weaker. The silver blue one was still watching him with those intelligent eyes. He checked his calculations again. If he was right, he could create a feedback loop using the station's damaged solar collectors. The energy pulse from the solar flare had left residual charge in the system. If he routed that charge correctly, he could overload the containment fields from the outside. The fields would collapse instead of sending a killing pulse, but it would take time to set up. At least 12 hours of work, maybe more, and his oxygen wouldn't last that long. Jake looked at the dragons one more time, then headed back to his ship. The Wanderer was small but reliable. Jake had built half of it himself from salvaged parts. He restocked his oxygen, grabbed some food, and checked his sensors. His blood went cold. Another ship was approaching the station. It would arrive in about 8 hours. Jake pulled up the ship's signature. Kravesh design. The hunters were coming back for their dragons. He had a choice to make. Leave now and save himself, or stay and try to free the dragons before the Kravesh arrived. If he stayed and failed, he'd probably die. The Kravesh didn't take prisoners. Jake sat in his pilot's chair for a long moment, staring at the approaching ship on his scanner. Then he grabbed his tools and headed back to the cargo bay. He worked faster now, racing against time. The solar collectors were on the outer hull, which meant he had to spacewalk to reach them. Jake suited up and went outside, mag boots keeping him attached to the station's surface. Space was beautiful out here. The dead moon hung below, gray and lifeless. Stars filled the sky above, more than he could count. Jake had always liked the silence of space. No voices, no questions, no one depending on him. Just him and the void. He reached the solar collectors and started rewiring them. His hands moved quickly, following the plan he'd worked out. Route the charge through the secondary power lines, build up the feedback loop, and time it perfectly with the containment field rotation. It took him 4 hours. When he was done, he went back inside and returned to the cargo bay. 6 hours until the Kravesh arrived. Jake connected his portable computer to the station's main system. He'd need to time this perfectly. One mistake and the dragons would die. The silver-blue dragon's eye was fully open now. She was watching him work. Jake felt that mental touch again, stronger this time. He got an impression of gratitude mixed with desperation. He nodded at her, even though he wasn't sure she understood the gesture. The crimson gold dragon's breathing had gotten even worse. Jake checked the biosigns on the console. The male dragon was dying. Even if Jake freed them right now, he might not survive. Jake made his final adjustments to the system. Everything was ready. He took a deep breath and activated the feedback loop. The station's lights flickered. Energy surged through the walls, making a sound like distant thunder. The solar collectors he'd rewired began pumping charge into the system, building toward the overload he needed. The containment field started to glow brighter. The dragons shifted uncomfortably inside them. Jake watched his computer screen. The charge was building. 30%, 40%, 50%. The station shook. Warning alarms started blaring. Jake ignored them and kept his eyes on the screen. 70%. 80%. The containment fields were starting to flicker. Almost there. 90%. Jake's computer beeped a warning. The Kravesh ship had just accelerated. They'd detected the energy buildup and were coming in fast. They'd arrive in 2 hours now, not 6. Jake slammed his fist on the console. He needed more time, 100%. The feedback loop reached critical mass. Energy exploded outward from... Jake dragged the cargo launcher controls from the wall panel and started working on them. His hand shook slightly, but not from fear. Adrenaline pumped through his veins. He'd been in combat situations before, back in his military days. His body remembered what to do. The female dragon, Venya, watched him. He didn't know her name yet, but somehow that's what she felt like. Venya. The male dragon, Korsath, still lay motionless on the floor. The cargo launchers were designed to shoot containers into space. Jake had to recalibrate them for living cargo. Less force, different trajectory. If he got it wrong, the launch would crush the dragons. 30 minutes until the Krevesh arrived. Jake worked faster. His fingers flew over the controls, adjusting settings, running calculations in his head. The station groaned around him. The electromagnetic pulse he'd created had damaged more than just the containment fields. The whole structure was falling apart. Venya made a sound like a growl mixed with a whimper. Jake looked over. She was trying to reach Korsath, dragging herself across the floor. Her wings were damaged, bent at wrong angles. She couldn't fly. Jake left the controls and ran to help her. He put his shoulder under her neck and pushed, helping her move closer to the other dragon. When she reached Korsath, she pressed her head against his. Jake felt something strange in his mind. Energy flowing between the two dragons. Venya was sharing her life force with Korsath, trying to keep him alive. He went back to the launcher controls and finished the adjustments. The system was ready. 20 minutes until the Krevesh arrived. Jake activated the station's cargo systems. 2 launch tubes opened in the floor, big enough to fit the dragons. But he needed to move them into position and they were too heavy, unless he used the gravity plating. Jake found the environmental controls and reversed the gravity in the cargo bay. Both dragons slowly lifted off the floor, floating in the zero gravity. Venya made a surprise sound but didn't resist. Jake pushed them toward the launch tubes, guiding them like massive ships. Korsath went into one tube, Venya into the other. She looked at Jake one last time before the tubes closed. He felt her trust in his mind and it made his chest tight. He sealed the tubes and ran back to the main controls. 15 minutes until the Krevesh arrived. Jake programmed the launch sequence. The tubes would fire one at a time, sending the dragons toward his ship. He'd already programmed the Wanderer's computer to catch them with the tractor beam and pull them into the cargo hold. If this worked, it would be a miracle. If it didn't, he'd just killed the last 2 dragons in the universe. Jake initiated the launch sequence. The station shook. The first tube fired with a deep boom that Jake felt in his bones. Through the bay window, he saw Korsath's form shoot out into space, tumbling slowly. The Wanderer's tractor beam activated, a blue light reaching out and catching the dragon. The beam slowed Korsath's movement and pulled him toward the ship. 3 seconds later, the second tube fired. Venya launched into space, her silver-blue scales catching the starlight. The tractor beam caught her too. Jake watched on his monitor as both dragons were pulled into his ship's cargo hold. The doors closed behind them. His computer confirmed they were aboard. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Then the Krevesh ship appeared on his sensors. They'd arrived early. Jake grabbed his gear and ran for the docking port where his ship waited. The station's alarms were screaming now. Structural integrity failing. The whole place was coming apart. He reached the Wanderer and sealed the airlock behind him. Through the window, he saw the Krevesh ship approaching. It was bigger than his, with weapons ports opening along its hull. Jake threw himself into the pilot's seat and fired up the engines. The Wanderer pulled away from the dying station just as the Krevesh ship opened fire. Plasma bolts streaked past, missing by meters. Jake punched the throttle. His ship accelerated, but the Krevesh were faster. They were closing in. He needed a plan. His ship had light weapons, nothing that could hurt a Krevesh hunter. He couldn't outrun them. He couldn't fight them, but he could use the station. Jake spun the Wanderer around and flew back toward the mining station. The Krevesh ship followed, still firing. Jake dodged and weaved, using every trick he'd learned in his military days. He flew straight at the station's damaged reactor core. The Krevesh must have thought he was crazy. They kept following, getting closer. Their weapons systems locked onto his ship. Jake waited until the last possible second, then yanked the controls hard. The Wanderer flipped sideways and shot past the reactor core, missing it by less than 10 meters. The Krevesh ship tried to follow. but they were too close and going too fast. Jake triggered the station's emergency self-destruct as he flew past. The reactor exploded in a massive fireball. The Crevesh ship disappeared in the blast. Debris scattered in every direction. A piece of metal hit the Wanderer's hull, tearing through the outer plating. Warning alarms screamed. Jake felt the ship lurch as atmosphere vented from the damage. He sealed off the damaged sections and checked his systems. Life support was failing. He had maybe an hour of oxygen left. Jake set a course away from the debris field and activated the autopilot. Then he collapsed in his chair, his whole body shaking. He'd done it. The dragons were safe. The Crevesh were dead, but his ship was dying. Jake dragged himself out of the pilot's seat and made his way to the cargo hold. He needed to check on the dragons. The hold was a mess. Both dragons lay on the floor, surrounded by scattered equipment and broken containers. Jake had cleared out most of his cargo to make room for them, but it was still cramped. Korsath wasn't moving. His breathing was so shallow Jake could barely see it. But Venya's eyes were open. She looked at Jake and he felt her mental touch again, stronger now. She showed him images. Her and Korsath flying together through clouds. Their home. A beautiful world hidden in a nebula. Their capture by the Crevesh, the terror and pain. And then she showed him gratitude. Deep, overwhelming gratitude. Jake knelt beside her. "It's okay," he said, even though he knew she probably didn't understand English. "You're safe now." Venya lifted her head slightly. She opened her mouth and a small spark of blue energy appeared. The spark floated toward Jake and touched his chest. He felt warmth spread through his body. The pain from his injuries faded. His exhaustion lessened. Venya was healing him, sharing her energy even though she barely had any left. "No," Jake said, pushing her head back down gently. "Save your strength. You need it." But Venya kept the connection. Jake felt her thoughts more clearly now. She was showing him how to help Korsath. There was medical equipment on the station's medical bay. If Jake went back, he could save the male dragon. Jake shook his head. "The station's gone. It exploded." Venya showed him another image. His ship's medical bay. Human medical equipment wouldn't work on dragons, but Jake could modify it. She showed him how, filling his mind with knowledge about Drakari biology. It was too much information too fast. Jake's head pounded. But he understood enough. He left the cargo hold and went to the medical bay. His oxygen alarm was beeping. 40 minutes left. Jake gathered every piece of medical equipment he had. Plasma infusion packs, neural stabilizers, cellular regenerators. He started modifying them, following the knowledge Venya had shared. His hands moved automatically, rewiring circuits, adjusting frequency settings. It was like fixing an engine, but the engine was alive and dying. 20 minutes of oxygen left. Jake finished the modifications and carried everything back to the cargo hold. He attached the equipment to Korsath, connecting it to the dragon's major arteries and neural centers. The machines hummed to life. Korsath's body jerked once, then lay still. Jake held his breath. Korsath's eyes opened. They were gold, bright and fierce. The dragon's head turned, looking at Jake. For a moment, Jake thought the dragon might attack him. There was no gratitude in those eyes, only confusion and suspicion. But then Venya made a sound, a series of clicks and rumbles. Korsath looked at her and something passed between them. The male dragon's eyes softened slightly. Jake backed away, giving them space. His oxygen alarm was constant now. 10 minutes left. He needed to fix the life support system or he was dead. Jake went to engineering and opened the main panel. The damage was worse than he thought. The plasma conduit had cracked and the oxygen recycler was offline. He could fix it, but it would take hours. He didn't have hours. Jake slumped against the wall. He'd saved the dragons, but he couldn't save himself. There was a certain irony in that. He heard a sound behind him. Venya had somehow dragged herself out of the cargo hold. She was in the corridor, pulling herself along with her front legs. Her back legs and tail dragged behind her. "Go back," Jake said. "You're too weak to be moving around," but Venya kept coming. She reached the engineering room and looked at the damaged systems. Then she looked at Jake. He felt her thoughts in his mind. She could help. She could interface with his ship's systems using her bioelectric abilities. Drakari could control technology with their minds. Jake stared at her. "You can pilot my ship?" Venya's response wasn't words, but he understood. Yes, but she needed him to show her how. Jake's oxygen alarm started screaming. 5 minutes left. He pulled up the ship's schematics on his handheld computer and showed them to Venya. She studied them for a moment, then closed her eyes. Jake woke up 3 days later in his own bed. His body felt strange, like he'd slept too long. He sat up slowly, wincing at the stiffness in his muscles. The last thing he remembered was sitting in the cargo hold, watching the dragons. He must have passed out from exhaustion. Someone had moved him to his quarters. Someone had also treated his injuries. Jake looked down at his chest where he'd been burned during the escape. The skin was healed, covered in a strange silver substance that felt cool to the touch. He got dressed and went to the cockpit. Venya was there, her body wrapped around the pilot's console. Blue energy flickered between her scales and the ship's controls. She was flying the Wanderer with her mind. When Jake entered, she opened one eye and looked at him. He felt her greeting in his thoughts. It was getting easier to understand her now. Not words exactly, but concepts and feelings. How long was I out? Jake asked. Venya showed him an image of 3 sunrises. 3 days? Jake shook his head. You should have woken me up. Venya sent him a feeling of calm. He'd needed rest. She could manage the ship. Korsath was recovering. Everything was fine. Jake checked the navigation computer. They were deep in uncharted space, heading toward a massive nebula cluster. The sensors showed strange readings ahead. Electromagnetic storms that would make navigation dangerous. Is that where we're going? Jake pointed at the nebula on the screen. Venya confirmed. Her home was there. Drakthar, the hidden world. Jake sat down in the co-pilot's seat. I thought your people were extinct. Everyone says the Drakari died out 300 years ago. Venya's response came as a series of images and emotions. The war between humans and Drakari had been terrible. Billions died on both sides. The Drakari survivors had fled to this nebula and hidden themselves. They'd let the galaxy believe they were extinct. It was safer that way. Why? Jake asked. Why hide? Venya showed him memories, not hers, but older ones passed down through her people. Human corporations hunting young dragons for their energy. Human weapons destroying entire dragon colonies. The war hadn't been between 2 equal powers. It had been slaughter. Jake felt sick. I didn't know. They never taught us that version of history. Venya sent him a wave of understanding. She didn't blame him personally. But her people blamed all humans. That's why she was nervous about bringing him to Drakthar. It was forbidden for humans to know the planet existed. Then why are you taking me there? Jake asked. Venya showed him an image of Jake freeing them from the containment fields. Then she showed him a Drakari concept that was hard to translate. Something like life debt mixed with honor and family. Kethtar. She and Korsath owed him their lives. They had to bring him somewhere safe, and Drakthar was the only safe place they knew, even if it meant breaking their people's laws. Jake looked at the nebula on the screen. What happens when we get there? Venya didn't answer. The silence told him everything he needed to know. She didn't know what would happen, but it probably wouldn't be good. A sound came from the cargo hold. Korsath was awake. Jake went back to check on the male dragon. Korsath was sitting up now, his crimson gold scales gleaming in the ship's lights. He was bigger than Venya, more heavily built. His eyes tracked Jake as he entered, and there was no warmth in that gaze. Hey, Jake said carefully. How are you feeling? Korsath rumbled, a sound that made the floor vibrate. Jake didn't need telepathy to understand the message. Stay back, fair enough, Jake said. He sat down near the entrance, keeping his distance. I'm Jake Morrison. I'm the one who got you out of that station. Korsath's eyes narrowed. He made a series of clicks and growls. Jake couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. Suspicion. Hostility. Venya's voice echoed in Jake's mind. She was explaining to Korsath what had happened. Jake felt the flow of information between the 2 dragons, faster and more complex than what Venya could share with him. Korsath listened, his expression unchanging. When Venya finished, he looked at Jake again. This time there was less hostility, but the suspicion remained. I know you don't trust me, Jake said. I don't blame you. But I'm not your enemy. I just want to help. Korsath made a sound that might have been a laugh or a snort. He sent a thought that Jake could barely catch. Humans always want to help, right before they hurt you. Not all humans are like that, Jake said. Korsath's response was cold. Enough, Jake didn't argue. How could he? The dragon was right. Humans had nearly wiped out the Drakari. One good human didn't change that history. The next week passed slowly. The Wanderer traveled deeper into uncharted space following Venya's guidance. Jake spent his time maintaining the ship and trying to stretch his food supplies. He had enough for himself, but the dragons needed to eat too. It turned out that dragons could eat almost anything organic. Jake fed them his emergency ration packs, protein bars, and even some of the frozen vegetables he'd been saving. Korsath ate silently, never acknowledging Jake. Venya tried to be friendly, sharing small mental conversations with Jake about her life. She told him about Drakari culture. Dragons lived for thousands of years. They organized themselves into clans based on family lines. The oldest dragons, the elders, led their people. They possessed knowledge and power that young dragons like Venya and Korsath couldn't imagine. She told him about their coming-of-age trial. Young dragons had to leave Drakthar and survive on their own for 1 year. It was meant to teach them independence and strength. But Venya and Korsath had been captured only 2 months into their trial. The shame of that capture weighed on both of them, especially Korsath. Jake also learned that dragons could bond with other species. It was rare but possible. The bond allowed for deeper mental communication and energy sharing. Venya had formed a weak bond with Jake when she healed him. That's why they could communicate better now. Korsath had refused to bond with Jake. He barely tolerated the human's presence. 10 days into the journey, the Wanderer reached the edge of the nebula. The ship's sensors went crazy. Electromagnetic storms raged ahead, powerful enough to tear a ship apart. "Are you sure we can make it through?" Jake asked Venya. Venya showed him confidence. She knew the safe paths. Her people had been using them for 300 years. The Wanderer entered the nebula. Lightning flashed outside the windows, blue and purple and green. The ship rocked and shook as energy storms buffeted it from all sides. Jake gripped his seat, watching the sensors flicker and fail. Venya remained calm, guiding the ship through the chaos with her mind. Jake realized she was using her bioelectric abilities to shield the ship, creating a protective field around them. They flew through the storms for 6 hours, then suddenly everything went calm. They'd reached the eye of the nebula, and there, hanging in space like a jewel, was Drakthar. The planet was beautiful, blue oceans, green continents, white clouds, but what made Jake stare were the cities. They floated above the planet's surface, massive structures of crystal and metal suspended in the air by some technology Jake couldn't understand. Hundreds of dragons flew between the cities, their scales reflecting the light of the system's twin suns. "It's incredible," Jake whispered. Venya sent him a feeling of pride and love. This was home, but that feeling was quickly replaced by worry. A fleet of adult dragons was heading toward them, at least 50 of them. They moved in military formation, weapons ports visible on their armored bodies. The Wanderer's communication system activated. A voice spoke in a language Jake didn't understand, but he heard the command in it. Venya responded in the same language, her voice creating sounds Jake didn't think were possible from a throat. The dragons surrounded them, weapons powered but not firing. They escorted the Wanderer toward the largest floating city. Korsath had joined them in the cockpit. He looked at the approaching city with mixed emotions. Relief at coming home, but also fear. "What's going to happen?" Jake asked. Venya's response was uncertain. They would be taken before the Council of Ancients. The elders would decide their fate, and what about me? Venya didn't answer, but Jake felt her fear. The penalty for bringing a human to Drakthar was death. The Wanderer was pulled into a landing bay by tractor beams. The moment the ship touched down, the bay doors sealed behind them. Jake looked out the window and saw dozens of adult dragons surrounding his ship. They all looked angry. "Stay here," Venya said. The first time Jake had heard actual words in his mind instead of concepts. "Let us talk to them first." "I'm not going to hide," Jake said. "If they're going to judge me, I'll face them." Korsath rumbled something that Venya translated. "He says you're either brave or stupid." "Maybe both." Jake opened the Wanderer's airlock. The atmosphere outside was breathable, slightly richer in oxygen than what humans were used to. He stepped out onto the landing platform. The adult dragons stared at him. Their eyes glowed with power. Jake felt the pressure of their presence, ancient and overwhelming. One dragon stepped forward. She was massive, with silver scales that had turned almost white with age. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds. Venya bowed her head. Korsath did the same. The silver dragon spoke, her voice like thunder. Jake didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Anger, disappointment, shame. Venya tried to explain, but the silver dragon cut her off with a roar that shook the landing bay. Jake watched the twin suns rise through his cell wall. The crystal glowed with morning light, painting everything in shades of gold and red. It would have been beautiful if he wasn't about to face trial for his life. The energy field around his cell made thinking difficult. Everything felt distant and slow, like he was underwater, but Jake forced himself to stay alert. He'd been in bad situations before. This was just another one. Guards arrived as the suns cleared the horizon. 4 dragons, each one ancient and powerful. They deactivated the cell and surrounded Jake with personal energy shields. "It's time," one of them said, the words appearing in Jake's mind. They walked through corridors of crystal and metal. The floating city was massive, bigger than any human structure Jake had ever seen. Dragons flew past the windows, going about their daily lives. Some stopped to stare at Jake. Most looked at him with hatred. The council chamber was at the heart of the city. The doors were 50 feet tall, carved with images of dragons and stars. They opened silently as Jake approached. Inside, the chamber was enormous. The ceiling stretched up hundreds of feet, open to the sky. 7 massive platforms floated in a circle, and on each platform sat an elder dragon. Jake recognized Elder Vraxis, the silver dragon who had captured him. The others were just as impressive. One had scales like volcanic rock still glowing with inner heat. Another was covered in blue-white ice that never melted. A third had scales that shifted colors like oil on water. These were the Council of Ancients, dragons who had lived for thousands of years and survived the war with humanity. At the center of the circle was a smaller platform. The guards led Jake to it. The moment he stepped on, energy fields sprang up around him. Not to contain him, he realized, but to project his thoughts. "Jake Morrison," Elder Vraxis's voice filled the chamber like thunder. "You stand accused of violating our most sacred law. You have entered Drakthar without permission. You have seen our hidden world. You have learned that we still exist." Jake looked up at the 7 elders. "I didn't ask to come here. Venya and Korsath brought me." "Because you freed them," said the dragon with volcanic scales. Jake felt the name in his mind. "Elder Thormund. Or so they claim. We have only your word that you are not a spy, that you are not here to report our location to your kind." "I'm not a spy," Jake said. "I'm just a mechanic, a salvager. I was looking for equipment when I found them." "And why did you free them?" asked the ice dragon, Elder Serac. "Humans do nothing without expecting something in return." Jake thought about that question. Why had he done it? Because it was the right thing to do. Because they were dying and I could help. Because I've seen too many people die when I did nothing. The color-shifting dragon spoke, her voice like music. "Elder Lysara, you speak of morality, but your people have no morals when it comes to us. They hunted us, enslaved us, killed our children for profit." "I know," Jake said. "I've seen the station logs. I know what the Krivesh were doing to Venya and Korsath. It was wrong. What happened 300 years ago was wrong too." "Then you admit your species is evil," Elder Thormund said. "No, I admit we're capable of evil, but we're also capable of good, just like any species." Elder Thormund's laugh was like rocks grinding together. "You are a fool if you believe that. I watched your ships destroy my home colony. I watched your soldiers kill my mate and my children. I saw no good that day." Jake met the elder's burning gaze. "I'm sorry for what happened to your family. I'm sorry for what my people did. But I wasn't there. I didn't do those things. You can't judge me for crimes I didn't commit, can't we?" Elder Vraxis said. "You are human. That is crime enough." The platform beneath Jake's feet began to glow. He felt something touch his mind, much stronger than Venya's gentle contact. The elders were reading his thoughts, seeing his memories. Jake tried to resist but couldn't. His entire life played out before the council. His childhood on Earth, his father teaching him about machines, joining the Colonial Defense Force, meeting his squad, the mission that went wrong, watching his friends die while he hid, unable to help, the shame and guilt that drove him to quit the military, the years of drifting alone, fixing things instead of people, finding the mining station, discovering the dragons, making the choice to help them. Every moment, every thought, every feeling was exposed. When it was over, Jake felt empty. The elders knew everything about him now. There were no secrets left, Elder Sarek spoke first. He tells the truth. His actions were not strategic. They were emotional, impulsive. Which makes him dangerous, Elder Thormund said. Unpredictable, or honorable, Elder Lasara said. He risked his life for strangers, for members of a species he had no reason to help. One good action does not erase 300 years of evil, Elder Thormund said. The elders began to debate. Jake stood on the platform, listening to them argue about his fate. Some wanted him killed immediately. Others wanted him imprisoned for life. A few suggested wiping his memory and returning him to human space. None of them suggested letting him go free. The chamber doors burst open. Venya and Korsath entered, their wings spread wide. Guards tried to stop them, but they pushed through. "We invoke Kethtar," Venya announced, her voice echoing through the chamber. The elders fell silent. Elder Vraxis's eyes widened. "You cannot." "We can and we do," Korsath said. It was the first time Jake had heard him speak with determination instead of hostility. "This human saved our lives. We owe him a debt that can only be repaid through the sacred bond." Elder Thormund roared. "You would bond with a human? Have you lost your minds?" "He freed us when he could have left us to die," Venya said. "He fought the Kravesh to protect us. He risked everything to bring us home. How can we do less for him?" The two young dragons landed on Jake's platform. They stood beside him, facing the council together. Elder Vraxis looked at her granddaughter with something like pain. "If you do this, you bind yourselves to him forever. His life becomes your responsibility. His choices affect your honor." "We know," Venya said. "We accept this." Elder Sarek studied them carefully. "The law of Kethtar is sacred. Even we cannot dismiss it, but we can test it." The ancient dragon's eyes fixed on Jake. "You say you wish to honor this bond? Then prove your worth. Undergo the trial of flame. Complete it and you will be granted the status of Kethtardan, an honorary clan member. Fail and you will die, but your death will be honorable." Jake looked at Venya. "What's the trial of flame?" Venya's mental voice was filled with worry. "It's what young dragons do to prove their maturity. It tests courage, strength, and the ability to channel bioelectric energy. The mortality rate is 30% for dragons. And for humans?" Venya didn't answer. She didn't need to. Humans couldn't channel bioelectric energy. A human attempting the trial would almost certainly die. Jake looked back at the council. "When do I start?" Elder Thormund smiled, showing teeth like swords. "At dawn tomorrow. That gives you one night to prepare. I suggest you pray to whatever gods your kind believes in." The guards escorted Jake back to his cell, but this time Venya and Korsath were allowed to accompany him. The energy field wasn't activated, so Jake's head cleared. "You didn't have to do that," Jake said. "Yes, we did," Venya said. "Kethtar is sacred to us. We cannot abandon you," Korsath rumbled in agreement. "You saved us. Now we must try to save you." Jake sat down on the crystal floor. "Tell me about the trial." "What exactly do I have to do?" Venya explained. The trial of flame took place in a volcanic arena. There were 3 challenges. First, navigate a field of plasma vents that erupted randomly. Second, solve an ancient puzzle while enduring extreme heat. Third, face a veteran warrior in single combat. "Most dragons can protect themselves with their bioelectric fields," Venya said. "You can't do that. The heat alone will kill you." Jake thought about it. "What if I could generate a field artificially? With equipment?" Korsath's eyes brightened. "That might work, but you'd need to understand how our energy works, how it flows and focuses." "Then teach me," Jake said. They spent the night talking. Venya and Korsath explained the principles of bioelectric energy. It wasn't magic, it was biology combined with physics. Drakari bodies generated and stored massive amounts of electrical energy. They could release it as lightning, shape it into protective fields, or use it to interface with technology. Jake listened carefully, making notes on his handheld computer. He'd spent his whole life working with electrical systems. This was just another kind of circuit, more complex but following the same basic rules. By the time the sun started to rise again, Jake had a plan. It was dangerous and probably wouldn't work, but it was better than nothing. "There's something else," Venya said quietly. "I could bond with you more deeply." "Share my energy with you." "It would give you a better chance." "No," Jake said immediately. "The bond is permanent, right? You'd be stuck with me forever." "I won't do that to you, but Jake..." "No," Jake repeated. "You've already done enough. If I'm going to do this, I'd do it on my own. Venya looked like she wanted to argue, but Korsath stopped her. Respect his choice. He fights with honor. The guards came as the suns cleared the horizon. It was time. They took Jake to the volcanic arena. Thousands of dragons filled the viewing platforms, come to watch the human attempt the impossible. Jake could feel their hostility like a physical weight. The heat hit Jake like a wall. Even through his protective suit, he felt it burning his skin. The suit was designed for dragons, not humans. It didn't fit right, and it wouldn't protect him for long. But he didn't need long. He just needed to be smart. Jake watched the first few plasma vents erupt, timing their patterns. They weren't random. Nothing in nature was truly random. There was always a pattern if you knew how to look for it. He counted seconds between eruptions. 5 seconds here, 8 seconds there, 3 seconds at the back. The vents were connected to the same magma chamber underground. When pressure built up, it released through the weakest points. Jake started moving, using his understanding of pressure systems to predict the next eruption. He was smaller than a dragon, lighter. He could move faster and fit through gaps they couldn't use. A vent exploded to his left. Jake rolled right, feeling the heat singe his hair. He kept moving, crossing the field in a zigzag pattern that looked random but wasn't. The crowd of watching dragons went quiet. They'd expected him to die in the first 30 seconds. Jake reached the puzzle platform and pulled himself up. His hands were burned, his suit was smoking, but he was alive. The puzzle was a crystal sphere covered in glowing symbols. According to what Venya had told him, he needed to activate the symbols in the correct order using bioelectric energy. Jake studied the symbols. They were arranged in a pattern that looked familiar. It reminded him of circuit diagrams, showing how energy flowed through a system. But he couldn't generate bioelectric energy naturally. He needed another way. Jake looked at his protective suit. It had power cells built into it, designed to help regulate temperature. What if he could modify them? He tore open the suit's control panel and started rewiring. His fingers moved fast, driven by years of experience. He connected the power cells in series, building up charge. Then he routed that charge through the suit's heating elements, creating a makeshift conductor. It was crude and dangerous. If he got it wrong, the suit would explode. Jake pressed his modified suit against the crystal sphere. Energy flowed from the power cells, through the heating elements into the crystal. The symbols began to glow, but not in the right order. Jake adjusted the flow, trying different combinations. The heat was getting worse. Sweat poured down his face. His vision blurred. He thought about circuits, about how electricity always took the path of least resistance. The symbols weren't a puzzle. They were a circuit. He needed to find the path. Jake traced the pattern with his eyes, following the logic of energy flow. There, he saw it. He redirected the charge, hitting the symbols in a specific sequence. The crystal sphere blazed with light, then went dark. The puzzle was complete, the crowd murmured. No one had expected the human to solve it. Jake stood up, swaying. His suit was ruined, smoke rising from the burned-out power cells. His skin was red and blistered. But he'd passed the second challenge. The final challenge walked onto the arena floor. He was massive, even for a dragon. His scales were dark gray, covered in scars from countless battles. One eye was milky white, blind, but the other eye burned with fierce intelligence. This was Commander Dravik, Korsath's uncle. A veteran of the war with humanity, Elder Thormund's voice echoed across the arena. The final challenge. Combat against a warrior of the old guard. You will be given a weapon. Fight with honor or die with shame. Guards brought Jake a plasma staff, a weapon used by dragon warriors. It was designed for hands bigger than his, and it was heavy. But it would have to do. Commander Dravik didn't speak. He simply attacked. The dragon moved faster than something that size should be able to move. His tail whipped around, trying to knock Jake off his feet. Jake dove under it, rolling across the hot stone. Dravik's claw came down where Jake had been standing, leaving deep gouges in the rock. Jake swung the plasma staff, aiming for the dragon's side. Dravik's wing blocked it easily, the staff bouncing off armored scales. This wasn't going to work. Jake couldn't match the dragon's strength or speed. He needed to think differently. Dravik charged, his massive body filling Jake's vision. Jake ran toward him instead of away, sliding under the dragon's belly at the last second. He jabbed the staff upward, hitting a gap between the belly scales. Dravik roared in pain and anger. His tail slammed down, catching Jake and sending him flying. Jake hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. He couldn't breathe. His ribs were broken. The plasma staff had fallen from his hands. Dravik walked toward him slowly, deliberately. You fought well for a human, but it's not enough. It's never enough. Jake forced himself to his knees. Blood dripped from his mouth. Everything hurt. Stay down, Dravik said. Accept an honorable defeat. No one will think less of you. Jake thought about his squad, about the people he'd failed to save because he'd given up, about Venya and Korsath who'd trusted him enough to risk everything. He stood up. Dravik's eye narrowed. Why, you cannot win. Why continue? Jake wiped blood from his mouth. Because Venya and Korsath didn't quit on me. Because your people deserve to know not all humans are monsters. Because I'm tired of running from who I could be. Something flickered in Dravik's expression. Respect, maybe? Or memory. Those are good reasons, Dravik said. But they won't save you. The dragon attacked again. Jake tried to dodge but wasn't fast enough. Dravik's claw caught him across the chest, tearing through his ruined suit and into flesh. Jake fell again. This time he didn't think he could get back up. Through blurry eyes he saw Venya in the stands. She was crying, tears running down her silver-blue scales. Korsath stood beside her, wings spread in agitation. Jake reached for the fallen plasma staff. His hand closed around it. He stood up one more time. The crowd had gone completely silent now. Even Dravik seemed surprised. Jake activated the plasma staff, but something was wrong. The weapon was damaged, sparking with unstable energy. Too much current flowing through broken circuits. The staff exploded in Jake's hands. Energy erupted outward, wild and uncontrolled. It should have killed Jake instantly. But instead, something impossible happened. Jake's body absorbed the energy. He felt it flowing into him, through neural pathways that shouldn't exist in humans. The bioelectric potential that Venya and Korsath had told him about, the latent ability buried in human DNA, suddenly activated. Blue light surrounded Jake's body. Not a strong field like dragons could create, but it was there, real and visible. The arena went dead silent. Jake stared at his hands, watching electricity crackle between his fingers. He could feel the energy now, could sense how it flowed and moved. Elder Vraxis rose from her seat. Stop the trial immediately. Dravik backed away from Jake, his expression showing shock for the first time. Jake collapsed. The energy field vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He lay on the hot stone, barely conscious. Venya and Korsath rushed onto the arena floor, breaking protocol. They surrounded Jake, shielding him with their wings. Elder Vraxis landed beside them. She studied Jake with an intensity that was almost frightening. Impossible, she whispered. Humans can't manifest bioelectric fields. Their biology doesn't allow it. But he did, Venya said. We all saw it. Elder Sarak joined them, moving with the slow dignity of extreme age. Not impossible, forgotten. The ancient dragon looked at the gathered council. Our oldest texts speak of a time before the separation, when dragons and humans shared common ancestors. The potential exists in both species. Humans simply lost the knowledge of how to access it. What does this mean? Korsath asked. Elder Sarak turned his gaze to Jake's unconscious form. It means everything we thought we knew about humans may be wrong. It means the war 3 centuries ago was not between different species, but between lost cousins who had forgotten their connection. Elder Thormund landed on the arena floor. The old warrior looked at Jake for a long moment. His expression was conflicted, centuries of hatred warring with new understanding. Finally, he bowed his head. This human has passed the trial of flame, not through strength or power, but through courage and determination. He has shown honor in the face of certain death. He has proven himself worthy. Elder Thormund looked up at the gathered crowd. More than that, he has shown us something we needed to see, that humans are not so different from us, that perhaps we have been wrong to hide in fear. One by one, the other elders landed around Jake. Elder Vraxis came first, tears in her ancient eyes. She touched her head to the ground, a gesture of deep respect. I ask forgiveness, she said, forgiveness for my people's ignorance. This human came in peace and we treated him as an enemy. He risked everything to save my granddaughter and I repaid him with threats and judgment. Elder Lysera bowed next, then Elder Sarak. The other elders followed. Finally, even Elder Thormund bowed. The old warrior's voice was thick with emotion. I have spent 300 years hating your kind. I watched them kill my family. I swore never to forgive. But you, Jake Morrison, have done what I thought impossible. You have shown me that hate can be overcome. Jake stirred, his eyes opening. He saw the 7 elders of the council, the most powerful beings in Drakari society, all bowing before him. "What's happening?" he whispered. Venya's voice filled his mind, warm and full of joy. "You did it, Jake. You survived the trial. More than that, you proved something important. You showed them that humans and dragons can find common ground."